The autumn air at Arlington National Cemetery carried a quiet weight, the kind of silence that seemed alive with memory. Rows upon rows of white marble headstones stretched like a vast sea across the rolling green hills. Each one a name, a sacrifice, a life given for something greater than self. Tourists moved softly, whispers replacing laughter, their footsteps muted out of respect for the hallowed ground. At the very heart of this sacred place stood the tomb of the unknown soldier, a monument not just of stone but of eternal promise, and guarding it as he did every day with unwavering precision was Jacob Walsh. Jacob's navy blue uniform was flawless, the creases sharp, his kepi hat angled to perfection. Dark sunglasses hid the intensity of his eyes, but his movement spoke louder than any words could. His boots struck the plaza with crisp echoes as he carried out his solemn duty. 21 steps, a sharp turn, 21 seconds of stillness. Then the ritual began again. Every motion was precise, deliberate, and steeped in meaning. To Jacob, this was not ceremony. It was a vow. He was 32 years old, a former Army Ranger who had walked through deserts and firefights, who had made decisions in seconds that shaped lives forever. Combat had left scars, some visible, others buried deep, but it had also forged him into a man of unbreakable discipline. Now, as a tomb guard, his battlefield had changed. The chaos of war had been replaced with the stillness of duty, yet the stakes felt just as high. Jacob knew that every tourist's gaze, every veteran's salute, every child's question carried with it the weight of expectation. The tomb guard creed was etched into his heart. My standard will remain perfection. My commitment is total. I will not falter. Behind his stoic expression, Jacob's senses were razor sharp. He noticed the faint rustle of leaves drifting across the plaza. He tracked the quiet murmur of voices in the crowd, the hum of a camera shutter, the subtle rhythm of his own breath. To outsiders, he was a statue in motion. To himself, he was a sentinel, ever watchful, ever ready. It was a morning like countless others, calm, crisp, seemingly untouched by the chaos of the world. Yet somewhere in that crowd, hidden among families and veterans, a shadow lingered. Jacob did not know it yet, but his sacred duty was about to be tested in a way no guard could ever train for. Among the quiet cluster of visitors gathered at the tomb that morning, there was one man who didn't belong. At first glance, he seemed ordinary enough. Another tourist with a camera slung over his shoulder, sunglasses hiding his eyes, and a jacket zipped neatly against the autumn breeze. He stood near the back, blending into the flow of schoolchildren, elderly veterans, and families with strollers. But for anyone watching closely, his presence carried a faint discord, a note out of tune in an otherwise perfect symphony. His name was Viktor Maratsov. Interpol had marked him long ago. A fugitive wanted for arms smuggling, terror financing, and suspected links to paramilitary groups scattered across Eastern Europe. The man had walked battlefields no less violent than the ones Jacob had known, though Victor's allegiance was never to duty or honor. His loyalty was to chaos, to power, to the satisfaction of tearing symbols down. And today, his gaze was fixed squarely on one of America's most sacred symbols. Victor's appearance was polished but not flawless. His leather jacket fit snug, almost too carefully chosen to appear casual. His hair was neat, his jawline sharp, but the detail that betrayed him sat lower. Scuffed combat boots, heavy and broken in, the kind a civilian tourist would never think to wear on a sightseeing trip. They had seen mud, blood, and marching. They were not chosen for fashion. They were chosen for survival. He shifted his weight subtly, scanning the guard with the kind of focus a predator reserves for prey. His hand brushed over the strap of his camera bag, where a compact pistol waited in darkness. A CZ-75B, checkmate, reliable and deadly. He had smuggled it past inattentive checkpoints, relying on disguises, false papers, and confidence. His plan was simple, his motives twisted. To him, this wasn't about shooting a soldier. It was about desecrating what the soldier represented. Victor muttered under his breath, words too low for the crowd, but clear enough for his own ears. Stone monuments for nameless men, a country that worships ghosts. His lips curled into a smirk as he spoke. Nearby, children clutched tiny flags, their parents pointing to the guard with reverence. Veterans stood a little taller, their eyes misting with memory. None of them noticed the man in the boots, the man whose presence was anything but reverent. But Jacob Walsh noticed. It wasn't obvious, not yet. Jacob didn't break his rhythm, didn't glance directly at the stranger. But years of combat had sharpened instincts into something almost animal. He felt the weight of eyes lingering too long. He registered the way Victor's posture was too rigid, too calculating. Tourists leaned casually, shifted their footing, took photos, whispered in excitement. This man, however, moved with quiet control, the kind soldiers carried like invisible armor. Jacob's sunglasses masked the subtle narrowing of his gaze. His steps remained perfect, but his awareness doubled, scanning the crowd with the edge of his vision. Something was off. It wasn't just Jacob who sensed it. Among the visitors was Margaret Hayes, a retired nurse and longtime volunteer at Arlington. She had spent decades in military hospitals. Her husband buried not far from the plaza. Margaret had seen men return from war broken, had seen the haunted stare in their eyes, had tended wounds both physical and invisible, and she recognized something familiar in the stranger's stance, the kind of hardness that didn't come from tourism. She frowned, watching as Victor adjusted his jacket, his hand brushing too near his side. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the wind. Victor didn't notice her watching. His attention was locked on Jacob, on the precise ritual unfolding step by step. He timed the turns, the pauses, the exact rhythm of the guard's movement. To the crowd, it was ceremony. To Victor, it was calculation. He wanted to know the exact second to strike, the exact moment the guard would be least ready. Jacob moved, 21 steps, halt, silence. His senses sharpened. His mind, though disciplined, flickered through silent warnings. He didn't know the man's name, but he knew the type. The kind who carried violence like a shadow. The kind who came to sacred places not to honor but to desecrate. Victor muttered again, a touch louder this time. "All this for bones no one even knows." His accent cut the words into sharp edges. A nearby veteran turned his head, frowning. Parents ushered their children a little closer, instinctively sensing unease. The air shifted. Something invisible passed through the crowd, a ripple of tension. Jacob felt it. Margaret felt it. Even the children, though they didn't understand why, clung tighter to their parents. Victor smiled faintly, the way a wolf might when circling its prey. He had traveled halfway across the world for this moment, and now, standing before the most disciplined soldier he had ever seen, he felt the thrill of his own twisted stage. The tomb stood silent, the crowd hushed. The guard continued his eternal ritual, and in that fragile stillness, one truth settled like a storm waiting to break. This morning would not remain ordinary for long. The morning sun shifted higher, stretching long shadows across the marble plaza. Jacob Walsh's boots struck the stone with the same crisp cadence they always did, measured, precise, unwavering. Yet behind the mirrored lenses of his sunglasses, his eyes scanned with a soldier's discipline, absorbing details invisible to the untrained. He never faltered in his 21-step vigil, but the rhythm of his mind no longer matched the rhythm of his boots. Something was wrong. It wasn't the weather, which was calm. It wasn't the crowd, which was hushed. It wasn't even the occasional camera click, the distant murmur of children, or the respectful shuffle of tourists. No, it was something else. A weight, a stare, a shadow pressing on instinct. Jacob had lived long enough under fire to know that feeling. He had felt it in dusty villages where a sniper might be waiting, in marketplaces where a bomber might slip unseen, in quiet valleys where silence meant ambush, that subtle tightening of the chest, the prickling of the neck. It was instinct honed by years of survival. His mind replayed the image he had caught at the edge of vision. A man in the crowd, posture too disciplined, boots too familiar, combat boots. Tourists wore sneakers, loafers, sandals, not boots that carried the memory of mud, blood, and years of war. Jacob turned crisply, the gleam of his rifle bayonet flashing in the sunlight. The stranger remained at the edge, calm, composed, staring. The kind of stare that lingered too long, sharp and unblinking. Across the plaza, Margaret Hayes watched as well. She had learned long ago to trust her gut. In hospitals, instinct often meant the difference between life and death. A patient might smile, might speak normally, yet her nurse's intuition would whisper, "Check again." And often, she'd been right. She felt that same whisper now. The stranger's shoulders were too square. His stance wasn't casual. He scanned with his eyes, not with curiosity, but with precision. She had seen soldiers stand like that. She had seen wounded men return from war carrying that same intensity in their gaze. But here, in a cemetery, his posture wasn't reverent. It was calculating. Margaret drifted closer to another volunteer, murmuring quietly, "Do you see that man? Leather jacket, dark hair." The volunteer glanced, shrugged, saw nothing unusual. Margaret's frown deepened. She knew danger when she felt it, even if others didn't. The crowd itself began to respond in subtle ways. Children grew quieter, clutching at parents. A veteran in a faded Marine Corps cap shifted uneasily, eyes narrowing as if memories stirred. Tourists, though unaware of details, felt the tension bleeding into the air. The atmosphere, once solemn and peaceful, now carried a faint crackle like the charge before a storm. Viktor Mrazov, the stranger in the crowd, noticed none of it. Or perhaps he noticed and didn't care. His eyes tracked Jacob's every move, measuring the precise cadence of the guard's patrol. 21 steps, halt. 21 seconds, turn. He muttered under his breath, his lips curling with disdain. A machine dressed as a man, a country kneeling to stone. Jacob didn't hear the words, but he saw the lips moving, saw the bitterness carved in the stranger's face. He cataloged every detail: height, weight, approximate reach. The bulge near his jacket could be a phone, could be a camera, but Jacob's instincts whispered otherwise. Too heavy, too deliberate. His training told him one truth: when your gut screams danger, listen. He completed another turn, his gloved hands steady on his rifle. He could not break formation, his creed forbade it, but his mind prepared. He mapped escape routes for civilians. He measured the stranger's distance. He timed how long it would take to cross the plaza in an emergency. Margaret took a slow breath and stepped closer to Jacob's path. When he halted for his 21-second pause, she caught his eye, just for a fraction of a second. To any other tourist, it looked like nothing. To Jacob, it spoke volumes. Her expression was grave, her lips tightening around words unsaid. He understood. She saw it too. Viktor shifted again, resting a hand near the strap of his bag. His other hand lingered near the edge of his jacket. His head tilted, his smirk widening just slightly, as though daring someone to notice. Margaret whispered sharply under her breath, though no one else could hear, "He's armed." Jacob did not flinch. His discipline forbade it, but his heartbeat, steady as a drum, now carried the edge of readiness. The veterans in the crowd began noticing more. One, tall and wiry, leaned toward his wife. "He's military. Look at his boots." Another, younger, placed a protective hand on his child's shoulder. The whispers spread like ripples in water. Still, the guard marched on. Viktor's mutters grew louder. A few nearby caught fragments of words. Symbols. Weakness. Lies carved in stone. Parents pulled children closer, unease rising. A man in uniform should inspire comfort, not dread. But here the man in boots carried an aura of threat. The air thickened. Margaret's hand slid discreetly into her pocket. She carried a small radio linked to security. Without drawing attention, she pressed the emergency button, a silent alarm rippling toward unseen guards on the periphery. It wasn't much, it would buy moments at best, but in moments lives could be saved or lost. Jacob completed another turn, rifle gleaming, boots crisp against stone. His vow was unbroken, his posture flawless. But beneath the surface, his mind was no longer on ritual. It was on survival, on defense, on readiness. The crowd didn't know his name, didn't know his past, didn't know the battles he had fought. But in that moment, every family, every veteran, every child was unknowingly relying on him. Viktor's smirk sharpened. He whispered something only he could hear. Soon. The sacred silence of the tomb trembled, fragile and thin. And Jacob Walsh, sentinel of the unknown, braced himself. The murmur of the crowd shifted from reverence to unease. Something in the air had changed, subtle but undeniable. Families who had been snapping photos now lowered their cameras. Children fidgeted, restless, clinging to their parents' legs. Veterans in faded uniforms straightened, their weathered faces sharpening as instincts long buried began to stir. Viktor Mrazov stepped closer. His leather jacket gleamed under the sun, polished to the point of vanity, but his boots scuffed the marble in a way no tourists should. He wasn't here for beauty. He wasn't here for honor. He was here to make a statement, and Jacob Walsh could feel the weight of it pressing across the plaza. Jacob's patrol carried on. 21 steps, pause, turn. His rifle never wavered, his eyes forward, his form immaculate. Yet his awareness was absolute. Every breath Victor drew, every subtle shift in his stance Jacob logged in memory. His training spoke through silence. The man was a predator. Victor's lips curved into a smirk as he spoke, just loud enough for Jacob and a few in the crowd to hear. Quite the show you put on here, soldier. All this pomp, all this ceremony. For what, a dying empire? The words sliced the stillness. Several tourists frowned, confused. A mother instinctively pulled her children back. One of the older veterans leaned on his cane, eyes narrowing with suspicion. The tone wasn't curiosity. It was contempt. Jacob did not respond. He couldn't. His oath bound him to silence during the watch, but his jaw tightened beneath the shadow of his sunglasses. He stood firm, an unbroken figure of discipline. Victor tilted his head, savoring the control. He took a deliberate step nearer the barrier separating the crowd from the guard's path. His voice carried further this time, each syllable polished, his accent faint but sharp. You guard a tomb while your country crumbles. Weak leaders. Corrupt ideals. Symbols built on sand. We see it. The world sees it. And soon everyone will know how fragile your monuments truly are. The words rippled through the gathering. Some in the crowd bristled. A veteran whispered harshly to another, "That's no tourist." Margaret Hayes stood near her booth, her hand steady on the small radio hidden in her pocket. She had already pressed the alarm, but her heart urged her to stay close, to watch. She recognized the pattern. First the taunts, then the escalation. She had seen this exact buildup in war zones, moments before the explosion of violence. Jacob's every instinct screamed. He couldn't break formation, couldn't confront directly, but his senses were locked onto Victor. He noted the bulge beneath the jacket, the glint of something metallic when Victor shifted. The man was armed. The crowd was sensing it too now. Whispers spread like wind through tall grass. A young couple stopped smiling, clutching each other's hands. A veteran removed his cap, holding it to his chest as if preparing for something solemn. Parents herded children behind them, instinctively forming barriers of protection. Victor's smirk grew wider. He could feel their fear. He thrived on it. He spread his hands theatrically, his jacket shifting just enough to suggest what lay beneath. So much silence, he sneered. Do you think it protects you? Do you think ritual saves you from reality? Margaret's heart thudded. She took a step forward, ready to draw attention, to shout, but Jacob caught her eye again. A flicker, subtle, controlled. A message, not yet. Victor tapped the edge of the barrier with his finger, his body coiled with confidence. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice so it carried like venom directly to Jacob. You can't stop what's coming, guard. One man against the tide? You'll fall, just like the country you serve. Jacob inhaled deeply, slow and deliberate. His posture remained flawless, but his entire being focused on the threat in front of him. He wasn't rattled. He wasn't afraid. He was waiting. The silence of the tomb hung heavy, every heartbeat amplified. The tourists, the veterans, the children, all frozen in place, caught in the gravity of a moment spiraling toward the inevitable. Victor's hand drifted, casual yet deliberate, brushing against the inside of his jacket. Not enough to reveal, but enough to suggest. Enough to promise. The crowd held its breath. Margaret whispered under hers, steady, certain. He's going to draw. Jacob's grip tightened imperceptibly on his rifle. He had seconds, perhaps less, before ritual gave way to combat. The line between ceremony and survival blurred, and Arlington's hallowed ground waited, suspended in dread. The storm was about to break. The silence around the tomb thickened until it felt like glass, fragile, ready to shatter. Every breath, every shuffle, every heartbeat in the plaza seemed amplified. The crowd, once murmuring with curiosity, now stood hushed, as though sensing history about to bend. Viktor Muratsov let the silence hang. He relished it. His lips curled into a grin that never reached his cold eyes. He straightened his jacket, fingers brushing the bulge beneath. He wanted Jacob to see it. He wanted the crowd to feel the dread. Fear was his favorite prelude. Jacob Walsh stood immovable, the image of discipline. His 21 steps, his halts, his turns, ritual still intact. Yet beneath the polished surface, the soldier in him roared awake. He could read Victor as clearly as a battlefield map. Weight shifted on the right foot, jacket strained at the seam, fingers twitching like they'd touched steel before. This wasn't bluff. This was escalation. Margaret Hayes knew it too. She had lived through war, had seen men poised on the razor edge between violence and restraint. The tremor in her bones told her what was next. She reached discreetly into her pocket, thumb pressed tight on the emergency radio. Her eyes never left Jacob. Victor took a step closer, his boots scraping stone. The sharp sound made several in the crowd flinch. He let out a low laugh, cruel and mocking. "You stand here like a statue," he sneered. "A soldier pretending to be marble. But marble breaks. And so will you." A veteran in the crowd clenched his cane tighter. A mother whispered for her children to stay behind her. A boy's small flag trembled in his hand. The tension rippled outward, one man's malice infecting the hearts of dozens. Then it happened. Victor's hand slid beneath his jacket with deliberate slowness, and when it emerged, the sunlight flashed across polished steel. A CZ-75B pistol, modified for silence and precision, rested in his grip like an extension of his body. He held it low, almost casual, but the sight was enough. The crowd gasped as one. A stifled scream cracked the air. Veterans moved instinctively to shield children. Parents dragged families back. Tourists froze in disbelief. In a place built to honor sacrifice, danger had arrived. Victor's grin widened as he let the pistol dangle in plain sight. He spoke with reverence as if unveiling a relic. "Beautiful, isn't it? Modified trigger, subsonic rounds, 15 bullets of truth." He flicked off the safety with a soft click. The sound rang louder than thunder in the plaza. "This is where your ceremony ends, guard. One shot and your precious tomb becomes a headline." Jacob's posture didn't break. His boots remained aligned, his rifle poised, his body still. But every muscle was coiled, primed to strike. His training whispered the same command over and over. "Wait. Time it. Then move." Margaret's hand trembled on her radio, but her voice, low and steady, whispered to herself, "Hold steady, Jacob. Please." The veterans felt it too. One muttered to another, "He's trained. Look at his grip. He's no amateur." The other nodded grimly. They had faced killers before. They recognized one now. Victor lifted the gun slightly, theatrically, savoring the dread in every eye fixed upon him. His voice dropped to a taunt aimed only at Jacob. "Any last words, guard? Will you die in silence, or will you beg for the traditions you cling to?" Jacob inhaled, slow, deep, centered. His heart did not race, it steadied. His world narrowed to the man before him, the weapon in his hand, the lives behind him. He had been here before, not in Arlington, but in alleys where insurgents raised rifles, in villages where children screamed, in ambushes where hesitation meant death. Victor's finger began to curl toward the trigger. The crowd stiffened, frozen in horror. Margaret's eyes filled with dread. A child whimpered, muffled against his mother's chest, and then Jacob moved. It was not ceremonial. It was not ritual. It was pure combat precision, forged from years of ranger discipline. In a blur of white glove and steel, his hand shot forward, clamping down on the pistol's slide before Victor could complete his squeeze. The fugitive's eyes widened in shock as Jacob's grip locked, unyielding. A twist, a snap of motion. Pressure applied at the perfect angles. The gun was no longer Victor's, it was Jacob's. The crowd blinked, unable to process the speed. One heartbeat, Victor held a weapon. The next, his hand grasped at air, his enemy armed instead. Gasps erupted. A cheer half formed in a veteran's throat. Margaret exhaled the breath she didn't know she'd held. But Jacob wasn't finished. In the same motion, his thumb released the magazine, sending the fully loaded clip dropping into his other hand. Brass gleamed in the sun. He racked the slide, ejecting the chambered round in a graceful arc. The bullet clattered against marble with a ringing ping that echoed like a bell of salvation. Safety on, chamber clear, weapon neutralized, all in under 3 seconds. Victor staggered backward, face twisted from triumph to rage. His hands clawed at empty air. "You," he snarled. Jacob cut him off, voice calm, clinical as if reciting a report. "CZ-75B, modified trigger assembly. Balkan network craftsmanship. Approximately 2,000 rounds fired, based on barrel wear. You chose the wrong place and the wrong man." The word struck like steel, cold, certain. Victor lunged, desperation replacing confidence. But Jacob was faster. Using the pistol as a pivot, He brought the rear sight down in a sharp arc. It connected with the bridge of Victor's nose crack. Cartilage splintered. Blood sprayed crimson across the fugitive's polished jacket. Victor cried out, staggering, clutching his ruined nose. "You broke my nose." Jacob's reply was ice. "I neutralized a threat to sacred ground. The broken nose is incidental." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others whispered in awe, all stunned at the lightning-fast exchange. Margaret gathered children toward safety, her voice calm, guiding them away. Veterans nodded with approval, one muttering, "That's how it's done, son." Victor stumbled, blood dripping, rage and humiliation twisting his features. "You'll regret this," he spat, words slurred. "We're everywhere." "This isn't over." Jacob didn't waver. His stance remained strong, his sunglasses reflecting the tomb. "It was over the moment you drew that weapon. The alarms are already live. The cameras caught your face from 6 angles. You have nowhere to run." In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder. Arlington security was closing in. Victor's bravado faltered. For the first time, fear cracked through his mask. He looked around. The crowd, the guard, the approaching wail of law. His empire of arrogance crumbled. Jacob stood firm, weapon safe in his grip, posture already shifting back toward ritual perfection. To the world, he was once more a sentinel. To Victor, he was an immovable wall. The deadly reveal had come. But it was Jacob Walsh who defined how it would end. The echo of the bullet hitting marble still lingered when the first cries rose from the crowd. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Veterans exchanged grave nods, and tourists whispered in disbelief. The tomb of the unknown soldier, usually a place of serene reverence, had just witnessed an eruption of violence. And yet, in the middle of it all, the silence of discipline remained. Jacob Walsh stood motionless, the pistol disabled in his hand. His uniform still immaculate despite the storm he had just faced. His chest rose and fell steadily. No tremor in his breath, no break in his composure. To anyone watching, he appeared carved from the same stone as the tomb itself. An unyielding sentinel who had done what needed to be done. Viktor Mrazov, however, was no longer the confident predator who had taunted the crowd. Blood streamed from his shattered nose, staining his crisp jacket. His eyes burned with humiliation and rage as he staggered half-dazed toward the steps. He wanted to escape, but the sharp echoes of sirens cut through the air like blades. The perimeter was closing fast. 2 Arlington police units screeched to a halt at the plaza's edge. Doors flew open and officers sprinted forward, weapons drawn, voices booming commands. "Hands where we can see them." "On the ground now." Victor froze, calculating. He glanced at Jacob, then at the officers. For the first time, the mask of arrogance cracked completely. His options had vanished. Jacob didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't even turn toward the chaos. His role was not to celebrate. His role was to protect. Slowly, with methodical precision, he placed the disabled pistol on the marble away from Victor's reach. His voice, calm and measured, cut through the air. "Weapon safe." Suspect attempted to fire. "He is disarmed." The officers nodded, trusting the guard's assessment even before they reached Victor. Their training told them what their eyes confirmed. This fugitive had been neutralized not by brute force, but by a man who lived in the space between ceremony and combat. "Down!" One officer barked again, advancing with a taser raised. Victor sneered through blood and pain. "You think this ends here? I've survived worse. You'll regret crossing me." Jacob finally turned, his gaze locking with Victor's. Behind the mirrored sunglasses, the fugitive saw nothing he could twist or exploit, only unwavering resolve. Jacob's words were quiet, but they carried the weight of truth. "You're finished. This ground doesn't bow to men like you." With that, Victor's final defiance broke. Officers surged forward, forcing him face down onto the marble. His wrists were wrenched behind his back, cuffs biting into skin still wet with blood. His threats dissolved into guttural curses muffled by the stone. The crowd erupted, not in chaos but in applause. Veterans raised their hands in salute. Families cheered through tears of relief. Children who had moments before cowered now watched in awe, eyes wide at the living example of strength and honor. Margaret Hayes, her face pale but composed, whispered words only she could hear. "They'll tell this story for generations." As officers hauled Victor to his feet and dragged him toward the waiting patrol car, his fury gave way to silence. The predator who once thrived on fear now looked small, powerless, and beaten under the weight of justice. His pistol, now evidence, lay harmless on the ground. Jacob did not follow. He did not need to. His post was not the chase, but the stand. He turned back to the tomb, boots striking in sharp rhythm. 21 steps, a halt. 21 seconds. His body moved as though nothing had happened, as though the interruption had never occurred. But to those watching, everything had changed. A father whispered to his son, "That's what true service looks like." A mother brushed tears from her daughter's cheeks. "Remember this. He stood for all of us." One veteran, leaning heavily on his cane, saluted with trembling fingers. "Perfection," he muttered, voice breaking. Margaret approached quietly, placing a hand on Jacob's arm as he paused. Her eyes held pride, gratitude, and a sorrow only she could carry. "You kept the vow," she said softly. "Even in chaos, you guarded what mattered." Jacob gave a single nod. No words. His silence spoke volumes. The plaza slowly returned to order. Families regrouped, veterans stood taller, and tourists carried away a memory etched into their souls. The tomb itself remained untouched, serene, eternal, a reminder that sacrifice could not be shaken, no matter how bold the intruder. As Victor's patrol car pulled away, sirens fading into the distance, Jacob resumed his watch. The rhythm of his steps returned, boots clicking against marble, echoing across hallowed ground. He was once again the silent guardian, unshaken by violence, unbent by threat. But those who had witnessed the moment knew better. They had seen the living embodiment of the creed. My standard will remain perfection. My commitment is total. I will not falter. And in their hearts they carried a story of how a wanted fugitive pulled a gun on a tomb guard and lost not to force, but to discipline, honor, and unyielding resolve. The courtroom in Washington, D.C. was packed beyond capacity. Journalists lined the aisles, cameras flashed outside the doors, and families of veterans sat shoulder to shoulder with politicians, military officers, and citizens who had demanded to witness the outcome. The case of United States versus Viktor Morozov was not just another trial. It was a reckoning. Viktor entered the chamber in shackles, flanked by marshals. Even with his broken nose and bruised face, he tried to walk tall, sneering at the crowd as though he still controlled the narrative. His suit, once crisp and immaculate, hung wrinkled and stained. The defiant glint in his eye told everyone he had no intention of admitting defeat. He raised his cuffed hands just enough to address the spectators. "This is a show," he spat. "You think you've beaten me? I am untouchable." "You'll see." The judge, a stern woman with decades on the bench, banged her gavel once, her voice sharp. "Order in this court. Defendant, you will remain silent unless addressed. One more outburst and you will be removed." Victor smirked, but he obeyed. For now, the prosecution began with precision, presenting the footage from Arlington. The giant monitor flickered, and suddenly the packed room was transported back to the marble plaza. The video showed Victor's hand emerging from his jacket, the glint of the CZ pistol, the crowd's panic, and Jacob Walsh's lightning-fast disarm. Gasps filled the courtroom, even though most had already seen the footage on the news. Watching it in this solemn chamber, with the tomb looming in memory, gave it new weight. The prosecutor's voice carried steady authority. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you see here is not just an assault. It is not just a threat against one man. This was an attack on the sanctity of our nation's most sacred ground. The defendant aimed to desecrate, to terrorize, to turn reverence into chaos. But thanks to the unshakable discipline of tomb guard Jacob Walsh, lives were spared, and the sanctity was preserved." The defense tried to twist the narrative. Victor's attorney, a sharp-suited man with slicked-back hair, argued that Victor had been emotionally unstable, that the gun was never fired, and that no one was physically harmed. He painted Victor as a man driven by trauma and persecution, not malice. But the jury's eyes drifted again and again toward the footage, toward Jacob. When the time came, Jacob Walsh was called to the stand. He walked forward with the same deliberate rhythm as his patrol at the tomb. His uniform was pristine, his posture perfect, his sunglasses absent now, revealing steady, calm eyes. The courtroom fell into silence as he took the oath and sat, his presence commanding without a single flourish. The prosecutor asked him to recount the moment. Jacob's voice was low even, and without embellishment. "I observed the suspect in the crowd. His behavior indicated pre-assault preparation. When he drew his weapon, my duty was clear: neutralize the threat while preserving the dignity of the tomb. I acted accordingly. The defense attorney rose, circling Jacob like a wolf testing its prey. "Sergeant Walsh," he said with a mocking edge, "you disarmed my client with remarkable speed. Some might say too much speed. Is it possible you overreacted? That you escalated a situation that might have ended peacefully?" Jacob's gaze did not waver. When a firearm is drawn in a crowd, there is no peaceful outcome. Hesitation costs lives. My response was measured, precise, and necessary. The lawyer smirked, but Jacob's calm crushed the performance. The jury's faces told the story: trust in the guard, disdain for the fugitive. Then Victor himself demanded to speak. Against his attorney's counsel, he took the stand. Shackles clinked as he pointed a trembling finger at Jacob. His voice rose, dripping venom. "You think you're a hero? You humiliated me in front of the world. You broke my nose, you broke my legacy. You're nothing but a machine marching back and forth like a puppet." Jacob didn't flinch. His reply was simple, unshaken. "I am a guard. I am a soldier. My oath is not to legacy or ego. It is to honor, to sacrifice, and to the men who rest where you dared to desecrate. You call that humiliation. I call it duty." The words silenced the room. Even the judge leaned forward, her expression softened by the weight of what had been said. Victor sputtered, tried to curse, but the gavel slammed down. "Enough," the judge declared. "The jury has heard all it needs." Deliberations took less than 2 hours. The verdict returned was unanimous. Guilty on all counts: assault with a deadly weapon, attempted terrorism, desecration of sacred ground, and intent to incite public violence. The judge's voice rang like a bell of justice as she delivered the sentence. "Victor Mrazov, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. May you spend the remainder of your days remembering that your arrogance met its end not in glory, but in disgrace." The gallery erupted. Applause, cheers, even tears. Veterans saluted Jacob. Families whispered prayers of thanks. Reporters scribbled frantically, headlines already forming. Tomb guard breaks fugitive in court. Victor was dragged out, screaming empty threats that fell flat in the face of his downfall. His empire of fear had collapsed entirely, crushed not by spectacle, but by the quiet strength of discipline and honor. As Jacob left the witness stand, Margaret Hayes met his eyes from the front row. Her hand over her heart, she mouthed the words, "Thank you." Jacob gave her a single nod. No victory smile, no sense of triumph, just the same calm composure that had carried him through every step of the ordeal. The courtroom emptied, but the story spread like wildfire. Across the nation, people spoke not of Victor's threats, but of Jacob Walsh's unyielding discipline. And in that silence, once again, the creed of the tomb guard echoed, "I will not falter. I will not fail." The trial was over, the sentence delivered, and Victor Mrazov's name faded into the darkness of disgrace. Yet at Arlington National Cemetery, life moved forward with the same rhythm it always had. The rows of white headstones remained untouched, the eternal flame burned on, and the tomb of the unknown soldier stood as steadfast as the men and women who guarded it. Jacob Walsh returned to his post without ceremony or fanfare. For him, there was no need for parades or medals. His duty had not changed, nor had his oath. 21 steps. 21 seconds. The discipline remained unshaken by violence, unbent by chaos. The world had seen him as a hero, but Jacob still saw himself as a soldier keeping his vow. Yet the world had changed. Visitors arrived at the tomb in greater numbers than before. Families carried not just flowers and flags, but stories. They whispered about the day a fugitive had pulled a gun, and how the guard never faltered. Veterans spoke with pride, saying they had witnessed history, not just in battlefields abroad, but in the silence of sacred ground. Children who once saw guards as distant figures now looked at them with wide-eyed awe, dreaming of growing up to carry the same unyielding standard. Margaret Hayes walked the plaza often. She watched Jacob in silence, her heart heavy with memories of her late husband and son. But now, alongside grief, she carried pride. She had seen with her own eyes how discipline could disarm arrogance, how silence could be stronger than fury. Each time Jacob passed by on his solemn patrol, she whispered to herself, "They're still watching over us." News outlets replayed the footage for weeks. Documentaries were filmed, articles written, and debates held in universities about the meaning of duty and sacrifice. But through it all, Jacob remained unchanged. He did not give interviews, did not bask in attention. He kept his silence as steadfast as the marble beneath his boots. In classrooms across America, teachers retold the story. This is not about violence, they explained to students. It's about discipline, about a man who stood firm when others might have crumbled. Even in the military, the moment became legend. Recruits studied the footage as an example of perfect composure under pressure. The lesson was clear. Weapons and power could fail. But discipline, true unbreakable discipline, could not. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with hues of gold and crimson, Jacob completed another pass across the plaza. He paused, 21 seconds of stillness, his figure silhouetted against the tomb. The silence felt eternal, heavy, sacred. Somewhere beyond the walls of Arlington, Viktor Muratsov sat in a cell, his empire of fear reduced to nothing. He raged, he plotted, he cursed, but his name would never rise again. He had become a cautionary tale, a reminder that arrogance crumbles in the face of honor. But Jacob Walsh, his name lived on, not through headlines or fame, but through the quiet legacy of discipline. He embodied the creed, carried it with every step, and passed it silently to those who watched. And so, the story found its place in history. Not of a fugitive's gun, nor of courtroom drama, but of a guard who stood unshaken. A man who proved that some vows cannot be broken, some posts cannot be abandoned, and some duties echo louder than violence. The world moved on. Seasons changed. Leaves fell, snow gathered, flowers bloomed again. But at the tomb of the unknown soldier, Jacob Walsh remained, a sentinel of silence, an anchor of discipline, a living promise that sacrifice would never be forgotten. Because long after the echoes of gunfire fade, the steps of a tomb guard endure.